Stop everything. Turn off the news panels. Forget the sanitized press briefings. Right now. A 48-hour countdown is actively ticking. That is the exact lifespan of the president's ultimatum to forcefully reopen the Strait of Hormuz. And to keep the public calm, Washington deployed a very specific narrative. Listen to the official claim. The president stated the delay in strikes was due to very good and productive conversations with Tehran, a diplomatic victory, a de-escalation. But intelligence does not care about optics. Mere hours after that broadcast went live, the Iranian state apparatus dismantled the narrative. They did not issue a diplomatic protest. They explicitly labeled the claims of talks with two specific words: fake news. Not a misunderstanding, not a stall tactic, fake news. And while Washington sold the illusion of peace, the Iranian military's Al-Anbiya Central Headquarters issued an absolute ultimatum. Their message was absolute. Any U.S. allied energy infrastructure will immediately be destroyed and turned into a pile of ashes. They are preparing for total closure, and the fallout has already breached the perimeter. British authorities just executed the silent arrest of two operatives, including an Iranian national. They were attempting to infiltrate the Scottish naval base housing the United Kingdom's Trident nuclear submarines. This is not a localized conflict. It is a homeland breach. I am going to show you three realities the defense establishment is actively trying to compartmentalize. We are going to examine the kinetic geometry of a 4,000-kilometer strike radius. We are going to map the direct threat to the Western homeland, and we are going to expose the fatal contradiction inside the alliance. That is the political illusion. Which brings us to reality number one, the kinetic core. United States Central Command explicitly confirmed the numbers. Over 9,000 Iranian targets, obliterated. Included in that assessment, 140 naval vessels, sunk or disabled. 9,000 targets. That is not a surgical strike. That is a systemic dismantling of a sovereign defense network. To execute a strike package of that magnitude, the Pentagon had to authorize continuous sortie generation. We are looking at stealth bombers, offshore Tomahawk cruise missile launches, and coordinated electronic warfare to blind the air defense radars. And look at the naval component. 140 vessels. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy does not operate standard destroyers. They operate a highly lethal, decentralized fleet of fast attack craft. Their entire maritime doctrine is based on swarm tactics. They use dozens of small, heavily armed speedboats to overwhelm the automated defenses of a billion-dollar American warship. By neutralizing 140 of these vessels, United States Central Command attempted to preemptively decapitate the swarm, a massive tactical success on paper. But the Pentagon is not celebrating, because in the last 24 hours, the strategic map was completely redrawn. Tehran did not retreat. They aggressively expanded their strike radius to 4,000 kilometers. 4,000 kilometers. To a civilian, that is just a distance. To a naval commander, that is an exclusion zone. A death sentence for power projection. A 4,000-kilometer radius pushes the threat vector deep into the Indian Ocean. It fundamentally alters the survivability of American military assets. And they proved it by locking intermediate-range ballistic missiles directly onto Diego Garcia. We need to understand the gravity of Diego Garcia. This is not a temporary forward operating base. This is the geopolitical anchor of the United States and the United Kingdom in the Indo-Pacific. It is a highly classified, heavily militarized atoll in the Chagos Archipelago. It houses strategic bombers. It services nuclear-powered fast attack submarines. It is the logistical spine for the entire Middle Eastern theater. For decades, it was considered untouchable, out of range, the ultimate safe haven. Now, it is painted by Iranian targeting radars. Let that sink in. When intermediate-range ballistic missiles are pointed at Diego Garcia, the calculus of war changes. These are not slow-moving drones. Intermediate-range ballistic missiles re-enter the atmosphere at hypersonic velocities. Defending against them requires highly specialized kinetic interceptors, like the THAAD system, which are stretched dangerously thin across the globe. If Diego Garcia is within range, it means there is no rear echelon. It means every Nimitz-class and Ford-class aircraft carrier operating within the Arabian Sea is effectively operating inside a kill box. The perceived umbrella of safety has collapsed. And while the Indian Ocean is locked down, the immediate front is saturating with a different kind of violence. Southern Israel is under a continuous barrage, but it is not standard artillery. It is cluster munitions, raining down on specific coordinates, Dimona and Arad. Listen to those locations. Dimona is not just a municipality in the Negev desert, it is the home of the Shimon Peres Negev Nuclear Research Center. Firing unguided or cluster-dispensing weapons at a nuclear perimeter is not a tactical accident. We need to look at the mechanics of the weapon. A cluster munition does not rely on pinpoint precision against a hardened bunker. The canister opens mid-air, dispersing hundreds of submunitions over a massive grid. It is an area denial weapon. It is designed to shred the soft infrastructure surrounding the hard target, the radar arrays, the cooling towers, the power stations, the personnel. By deploying cluster munitions over Dimona, they are attempting to bypass the Iron Dome's standard intercept geometry. The Iron Dome is optimized for single trajectory rockets. When a cluster shell opens before the apex of the interception, the system is forced to calculate hundreds of new trajectories simultaneously. They are testing the absolute threshold of a nuclear-armed state. And standing behind these launches is the Al-Anbiya Central Headquarters, the central nervous system of the Iranian military apparatus. They issued the directive that governs this entire escalation. You heard the quote in the beginning, but look at the specific phrasing they used for their operational doctrine. Any U.S. allied energy infrastructure will immediately be destroyed and turned into a pile of ashes. They are not bluffing. The destruction of 140 Iranian vessels was supposed to secure the waterways. Instead, it triggered a massive decentralized retaliation that spans from the nuclear facilities in the Negev desert all the way to the bomber runways of the Indian Ocean. The kinetic envelope is expanding. The military is bleeding resources to maintain the line. But the kinetic expansion in the Middle East was just the beginning. Which brings us to reality number 2, the homeland threat and the weaponization of survival. Iran just pushed past the boundaries of standard warfare. They published a highly specific target list. And it does not just list forward operating bases or supply depots. It directly threatens the United Arab Emirates, specifically the Baraka nuclear power plant, and the vital Gulf desalination infrastructure. Striking a nuclear facility is not a conventional act of war. It is an intentional radiological hazard, a deliberate attempt to contaminate the economic center of the Persian Gulf. But the true creeping horror lies in the desalination plants. Let us look at the absolute mechanics of this threat. The Arabian Peninsula does not have sprawling freshwater lakes or massive underground aquifers. The nations of the Gulf Cooperation Council rely almost entirely on thermal and membrane desalination for their daily drinking water. Without those plants actively pumping, a modern, hyper-developed nation-state has roughly 48 to 72 hours of municipal water reserves. 72 hours. Striking a desalination facility is not infrastructure sabotage. It is a medieval siege tactic applied to a modern metropolis. It is the immediate deployment of a weapon of mass destruction, delivered through the mechanism of absolute thirst. Millions of civilians facing terminal dehydration within days. It bypasses American military superiority completely. The Iranian military is signaling that they can and will turn off the water. And while the threat of thirst paralyzes the Gulf Coast, the airspace over Saudi Arabia has already been compromised. 2 suicide drones successfully penetrated the defensive perimeter. They bypassed the early warning radars. They evaded the multi-billion-dollar Patriot missile batteries protecting the capital. And they directly struck the United States Embassy in Riyadh, sparking a massive fire. The architecture of modern air defense is built for high-altitude fighters and hypersonic ballistic arcs. It is completely blind to slow-moving, low-heat signature loitering munitions hugging the desert floor. They utilize terrain masking to remain entirely invisible until the final terminal dive. They hit the embassy, a sovereign diplomatic compound burning in the heart of the most heavily defended Allied capital in the region. But the perimeter has collapsed much further than Riyadh. The war has breached Western homeland security. This is the reality the defense apparatus desperately wants to suppress. British authorities just executed the arrest of 2 individuals. One of them, a confirmed Iranian national. They were not intercepted at a border checkpoint. They were actively attempting to infiltrate the Scottish naval base, the exact facility that houses the United Kingdom's Trident nuclear submarines. This is Her Majesty's Naval Base Clyde, Faslane, the absolute core of the British nuclear deterrent. The Vanguard-class submarines docked there carry the Trident ballistic missiles. The fact that a foreign operative could physically maneuver close enough to attempt infiltration at a Tier 1 nuclear facility exposes a catastrophic failure in domestic counterintelligence. If the Homeland Security grid cannot protect the nuclear deterrent in Scotland, the concept of a safe, impenetrable Western homeland is officially dead. The front line is no longer a desert thousands of miles away. The network is already inside the gates. And how is the administration responding to this systemic collapse? By accelerating the timeline. President Trump issued a rigid 48-hour ultimatum to forcefully reopen the Strait of Hormuz. To the public, it sounds like decisive leadership, a strongman imposing order on geopolitical chaos. To a military tactician, it is a ticking time bomb. Let us dissect the geography of the Strait of Hormuz. At its narrowest, the strait is just 21 miles wide, but the deep-water shipping lanes required for massive military vessels are only 2 miles wide in either direction. It is a geographical bottleneck, a textbook choke point. By ordering the forceful reopening of this specific corridor, the Commander-in-Chief is cornering thousands of newly deployed United States Marines. Thousands of Marines. He is ordering them to load into amphibious assault ships and sail directly into a pre-sighted kill zone. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps has spent 3 decades fortifying the northern coast of the strait. They have anti-ship cruise missiles hidden in deep mountain bunkers. They have midget submarines waiting in the shallow, acoustic masking waters. They have layered sea mines capable of breaking the keel of a warship. An amphibious assault ship is a slow, high-value target, packed with aviation fuel, packed with munitions, packed with human lives. A 48-hour mandate strips the military of its tactical patience. It strips their ability to methodically sweep for mines or dismantle coastal batteries. It forces a rushed, brute force deployment. It places American service members directly into the line of a catastrophic regional crossfire, simply to meet a political deadline. The military strategy is no longer dictated by tactical safety or operational readiness. It is dictated by the clock. That is the tactical reality on the ground. But 6,000 miles away, in the air-conditioned briefing rooms of Washington and London, a completely different war is being manufactured. Which brings us to reality number 3, the contradiction engine. Let us examine the first collision, the cover-up versus the absolute reality. We established the timeline. The president stood before the cameras and explicitly claimed he delayed military strikes due to very good and productive conversations with Tehran. A narrative of masterful statesmanship, a narrative of absolute control. But look at the strategic naivety of that statement. While the commander-in-chief was projecting diplomatic dominance to the domestic voter base, the Iranian state media was already drafting the rebuttal. They shattered the illusion within hours. They called it fake news, and they prepared to close the strait. This is not just a political embarrassment. It is a fatal operational vulnerability. When the highest executive authority publicly broadcasts a de-escalation, it forces the military apparatus to adjust its posture. It creates a window of hesitation for the fleet, and in a theater where hypersonic glide vehicles travel at miles per second, hesitation is a death sentence. Washington attempted to gaslight the international community into believing the crisis was managed. They prioritized the perception of power over the preparation for impact. They lied to keep the algorithmic trading platforms from crashing the markets. And in doing so, they signaled profound weakness to an adversary that was already arming its coastal anti-ship batteries. But the deception is not just contained within the United States. The entire Western alliance is fracturing under the pressure of this kinetic reality. Look at the second collision, the frantic warning from Tel Aviv, and the brutal public betrayal from London. Israel is actively ringing the highest possible alarm bell inside NATO headquarters. They are circulating urgent intelligence warnings that Iranian ballistic missiles will soon strike Paris and London. Let us decode the geopolitical calculation here. Israel is fighting a multi-front war of attrition. They are absorbing cluster munitions on their nuclear infrastructure. They desperately need the United States and European allies to fully commit to a direct, decapitating strike on the Iranian mainland. And the fastest way to drag European powers into a regional kinetic exchange is to convince them that their own capitals are in the crosshairs. It is a calculated attempt to weaponize panic, to trigger an Article 5 security response based on an existential threat to the European mainland. But the United Kingdom refused to play the game. In a stunning public demolition of an Allied intelligence agency, United Kingdom Minister Steve Reed went on the record. He did not issue a vague diplomatic non-denial. He explicitly stated there is absolutely no official intelligence assessment to support the fabricated threat that London or Paris are targeted. Listen to the gravity of that betrayal. The United Kingdom and Israel are deeply intertwined intelligence partners. They share signals intelligence, they share satellite telemetry. For a British minister to stand at a podium and publicly label an Israeli warning as essentially fabricated, that is unprecedented. It exposes a massive intelligence gap, a civil war inside the Allied command structure. Why would London humiliate Tel Aviv in the middle of a global crisis? Because the British intelligence apparatus is already suffocating. They just arrested operatives at their own nuclear submarine base in Scotland. The homeland is already bleeding. They know that validating Israel's claim would cause immediate, catastrophic panic in the financial markets of the City of London. It would crash the pound sterling. It would force the immediate deployment of exo-atmospheric interceptor batteries they simply do not have in sufficient numbers to protect their own airspace. So they chose to publicly sever the intelligence lifeline. They chose to abandon the Israeli narrative to protect their own domestic stability. We are watching the total collapse of the unified Western Front. Israel is desperately trying to widen the theater of operations. The United Kingdom is desperately trying to wall it off. And Washington is paralyzed by its own fabricated narrative of productive conversations. They are fighting each other for control of the story, while the adversary is fighting for control of the grid. Let us step away from the podiums. Let us step away from the grand strategy of the Persian Gulf and the intelligence apparatus of London. When the political calculus fails, the mathematics of trajectory take over, and gravity is entirely indifferent to ideology. Over the skyline of Tel Aviv, a multi-billion-dollar network of advanced interceptors was calculating thousands of overlapping kinetic vectors, exo-atmospheric kill vehicles, layered radar grids, the absolute pinnacle of Western aerospace engineering operating at maximum processing capacity. But defense algorithms are a game of percentages. And in a saturated airspace, a fraction of a percent is a statistical certainty. A single cluster munition bypassed the electronic countermeasures. It slipped through the outer envelope of the defense tier. It did not strike a military cantonment. It did not hit a logistics hub. The terminal trajectory ended at a children's daycare center in Rishon LeZion. There was no strategic value to the coordinates, just the cold physics of a submunition payload deploying over a civilian grid. The structural integrity of the facility was instantly compromised. The post-strike assessment does not detail the geopolitical implications. It only catalogs the kinetic debris, the shattered cinder blocks, the thermal scarring on the perimeter walls, the sudden, absolute quiet that follows a localized atmospheric overpressure event. And this exact same mathematics applies across the border. The geography changes, but the terminal velocity remains identical. Deep within the strike radius of the Allied retaliation, the Minab school bombing has just been officially categorized. Intelligence analysts have updated the operational ledger. It is now classified as the worst mass casualty event of this entire kinetic exchange. Look past the sterile terminology of the briefing documents. Mass casualty event. That is the administrative designation for a direct hit on an educational facility. It is the bureaucratic translation for pulverized concrete, collapsed load-bearing walls, and classrooms coated entirely in ash, and the biological reality of the strike. The thermal wave does not discriminate between a hardened command bunker and a civilian corridor. The strategists in Washington and the commanders at the Al-Anbiya Central Headquarters are moving carrier strike groups and ballistic missile divisions across a geopolitical chessboard. They are calculating the survival of governments. But the true cost of their friction is not paid in naval tonnage or intercepted radio transmissions. It is paid in the micro details. A specific street corner in Rishon LeZion, a specific school zone in Minab. It is paid by the smallest demographics trapped inside the kill box, who have no agency in the diplomatic failures of the elite. The noise of the administration is deafening, but the aftermath on the ground is just silence. The perimeter is breached. The fleet is trapped in a 48-hour kill box, and the people in power are still lying to your face. That is the absolute state of this conflict. You are watching a real-time systemic collapse, packaged and sold as a diplomatic masterclass by the politicians in Washington and the intelligence apparatus in London. They are securing their legacy while the citizens absorb the kinetic shockwave. A Tier 1 nuclear submarine base was infiltrated. The Strait of Hormuz is a geographic death trap for thousands of Marines. And the administration is completely paralyzed by its own manufactured narrative. So, look at the raw data and make your own tactical assessment. When the domestic grid is targeted and the casualties continue to rise, who is actually the greatest threat to your survival right now? The foreign military aggressively expanding its strike radius? Or the elected officials who sold you the illusion of peace while leaving the homeland completely exposed? Drop your intelligence assessment in the comments.